World military expenditure has just hit $2,887 billion, the highest figure ever recorded, and the 11th year in a row it has risen. That number alone would be the story in most years. In 2026, it isn't even the most dangerous number on the board. The official story is that today's crises, a closed shipping lane, a mineral export list, a record defense budget, are separate headlines. But a survey of 90 central banks and sovereign wealth funds managing roughly $10 trillion in assets just found something that has never happened before. For the first time, more of them plan to shrink their dollar holdings than expand them. When you put that number next to the other two, a single mechanism appears, and it is one history has used to start wars before. Start with the oldest of the three triggers, the choke point. In October 1973, Arab members of OPEC cut oil exports to Israel's allies in retaliation for the Yom Kippur War. By January 1974, the price of oil had quadrupled, from $2.90 to $11.65 a barrel. It was the first time the modern world watched a regional war reach into economies that had no direct stake in the fighting, simply by controlling the pipes the fighting happened to run through. The second trigger has its own history, and it is older still. In 1913, on the eve of the First World War, Germany spent £101.8 million on its military, £78.3 million on the army, £23.8 million on the navy. Britain spent £77.1 million. Both figures were the product of a 15-year buildup that historians now treat as one of the conditions that made 1914 possible. Two rival powers, each convinced that falling behind the other was more dangerous than the arms race itself. The third trigger is the newest and the least discussed. Rare earth elements and critical minerals, the materials inside everything from missile guidance systems to electric vehicle batteries, have quietly become the resource equivalent of the 1973 oil weapon. China refines an estimated 91% of the world's rare earths. For most of the last decade, that dependency sat in the background of the global economy. In 2026, it did not stay there. Three separate historical templates, three separate eras. And in 2026, for the first time, all three are live simultaneously. The choke point fired first. Joint Israeli and U.S. strikes on Iran began on February 28, 2026. Iran responded by declaring the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway that carries roughly 13 million barrels of oil a day, about one-fifth of everything the world consumes, closed to U.S. and Israel-allied shipping. Brent crude rose approximately 65% or $46 a barrel by the end of March 2026, its largest monthly rise on record. The International Energy Agency has called the resulting shortfall, up to 14 million barrels a day under a full blockade, the largest single oil supply disruption in market history. The resource weapon fired next. On June 22, 2026, China's Ministry of Commerce added 10 U.S. rare earth companies, including MP Materials and USA Rare Earth, to its export control list. An industry-wide analysis has found that policy has already cut European firms' licensing approval rates for critical minerals below 25% and pushed prices on rare earths, tungsten, and antimony up by as much as sixfold. The EU imports an estimated 95% of its strategic raw materials, with China as its primary supplier. In February, the United States convened 54 countries and the European Commission in Washington for the Critical Minerals Ministerial, launching the Forge Forum, signing 11 new bilateral frameworks, and backing a separate $10 billion export-import bank loan for a national minerals stockpile. The largest financing commitment in the bank's 92-year history. It is a response measured in years. The dependency it is trying to fix took decades to build. Underneath both, the third trigger keeps climbing. Global military spending is now at $2,887 billion, up for the 11th consecutive year in a row. The United States, China, and Russia alone account for $1,480 billion of it, 51% of the world total. NATO's members spent $1.581 trillion in 2025. Congress has already approved over $1 trillion in U.S. defense spending for 2026, with a proposal on the table to raise that to $1.5 trillion in 2027. And it is against that backdrop. Record military spending, a shooting war already reshaping oil markets, and a resource war already reshaping supply chains. That the dollar survey landed in June. 82% of central banks now hold gold, and for the first time, the balance of intent among the world's reserve managers has tipped away from the currency that has underwritten the global financial system since Bretton Woods. None of these three triggers, on its own, has to end in a wider war. The most likely path, based on current indicators, is not a single unifying conflict, but continued nonlinear escalation. Intermittent disruptions to Hormuz shipping keep oil prices elevated and unstable. China's rare earth licensing bottleneck persists as what analysts call a tactical pause rather than a strategic reversal, and global military spending keeps climbing past $3 trillion. Adding cost pressure to sovereign balance sheets, already stretched by a record $29 trillion in expected 2026 bond issuance. For people who do not trade oil futures or sit on a central bank reserves committee, the mechanism still reaches them. It shows up as the price at the pump, the cost of anything built with a battery or a guidance chip, and eventually the interest rate a government pays to borrow money it needs for anything else. At the same moment, three countries, Belarus, Lebanon, and Venezuela, are already sitting in outright sovereign default. The worst-case version is not speculative fiction. It is the same mechanism as 1973 and the same mechanism as 1914, running at the same time in the same year for the first time. A prolonged Hormuz closure, a further hardening of Chinese export controls, and a debt shock in an already distressed economy would not need to be coordinated to compound. History's precedent is that they rarely are, and that the compounding is the dangerous part. In 1973, the trigger was oil. In 1914, it was an arms race nobody would be the first to stop. In 2026, for the first time, both triggers are active in the same year. And there is a third one now, running through a mineral supply chain most people have never thought about. The question this series turns to next is not whether these three pressures are real. The data says they are. The question is, which one moves first?